God loves us and God has provided for us, and that if we turn to Him even in those desert times, we're defended. Let's pray. Father God, I want to thank you for your love and your guidance. I want to thank you, Lord, for this church, this family of believers. Lord, I ask that you would open our hearts now to you. Open our minds to you, God. Help us to see you in a new and a fresh way. To really understand who you are and what you have for us, Lord. Help us to see you in the way you react to situations or interact with situations, Lord. Help us to know your heart. So, Lord, I ask that your Holy Spirit will teach us today. In Christ's name. What would you consider to be the most valuable possessions that you have in life? Would it be your computer, your cell phone? Would it be maybe you have a piece of jewelry that was given to you? Maybe you have a special keepsake, some photos. You might say, well, the most valuable possessions to me are the people in my life, my brothers, my sisters, my wife, husband, my parents, my children. We have a lot of things that we place extreme value on. That if we had to really think about it, we would say, these are my most valuable, not necessarily possessions, but things in our lives. Now imagine, if you will, if you're thinking about those things or people, imagine if they were suddenly, overnight, taken from you. They were stripped from you. How would you react? If all of the people that were valuable to you in life are suddenly removed in one stroke. Or if all those things that you have value on, that your precious memories, things were taken from you. Maybe your health even was taken from you. How would you react? Would you shake your fist at God? Or would you turn to Him? Our memory verse today is Proverbs 14:32. And it says, when calamity comes, the wicked are brought down. But even in death, the righteous seek refuge in God. Even in death, the righteous seek refuge in God. But you might say, well, how is such a reaction, though, even possible? I mean, granted, you've heard the expression, there are no atheists in foxholes. I mean, when push comes to shove, no matter who you are, oftentimes you turn to a divine power, to God, help save me. And the righteous, of course, I mean, those who have followed that are even more likely, right, to turn to God when terrible, terrible things happen. But what about when you really don't understand why God is taking you through this journey? What happens when let's say that you have your whole life before you? You're a teenager, or you're just now in college, and all of a sudden, if you were faced with death, you were going to die. Your body is wasting away with cancer or some kind of disease or whatever. how would you react? Would you feel betrayed? Would you feel, God, where are you in this? Or maybe you'd gone to a mission field, or you went to a certain place and God had really directed you and you knew that. And you were there. And then, whatever, rebels or whatever attacked, and all of a sudden your life is on the line. Or you're hungry and you're thirsty. You don't know where your next meal or your next drink is going to come from. How do you react then? It's easy when we've lived a long life or whatever, at least I think it would be easier, to seek refuge in death with God. But for the young, I remember when my sister-in-law, Jan, was diagnosed with cancer. And I traveled to Nairobi, Kenya, to arrange for her to be brought back. The doctor had opened her up inside, looked inside, said there's nothing we can do, and sewed her back up. She had worked for 20-something years as a missionary in Indonesia. She had worked for the past 8-9 years, I think it was, in Uganda. And all of a sudden, here in her 40s, she's struck with cancer, and she's dying. And we brought her home and back to her mom's house, and we were there, and Joyce was taking care of her. And I know she had questions. Why me? Why now? Wasn't I serving you? And I'm sure others as well were asking that question, why her, Lord? She's serving you. Why do this? Why allow this to happen? Sometimes in those situations, it can be really difficult to trust. It can really be difficult to see the goodness of God in those situations. Even though we know intellectually we need to, sometimes it's hard because we're human and we're weak. And we just don't understand. Last week we began to study the life of Job. And we saw, if you remember right, that Satan, the accuser, came with all the angels to be before God. And God mentioned Job. And Satan said, well, does Job worship you for no reason at all? Of course he worships you. Of course he follows you because you blessed him so much. You take that away from him. You take that hedge of protection away from him. He's going to curse you to your face. See, Satan's, the accuser's idea of who Job was that he was a person who was totally self-seeking. That as long as things were going great for him, of course he'd worship the one who was giving him stuff. But if you take that away, what was the point of worshiping God? Before we go further into this, let's look again at what all Job has to lose. Job 1 through 3. We talked about this last week, but in the land of Uz there lived a man whose name was Job. The man was blameless and upright, feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons, 3 daughters, big family. And he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys. So in other words, he had sheep, he had children, he had sheep, camels, oxen, donkeys. He had a large number of servants, and he was the greatest man among all the people of the East. He had esteem. And all these things. So many things that he could say, these are my most valuable possessions. This is what I've got. But the hedge is gone now. An unspeakable calamity follows. Satan's attack begins with the events of Job 1, 13 through 19. Let's look at those. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing, and the donkeys were grazing nearby. And the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword. I'm the only one who's escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants. I'm the only one who's escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword. I'm the only one who's escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, "Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead. And I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." In a matter of minutes, Job loses everything. All of that blessing that was there, it is all torn from him. Now, is everything taken away from him? We're going to find that not every single thing in life. No, but the things that in his culture would be seen as the marks of his success, and possibly in his own mind, the marks of his success, what in many ways would define him, to define this image of Job, that the greatest man in the East. They're all gone. They're torn from him. He's lost his children. Children in our society are extremely important. In this society they were too, but they were more than they are, I think, in some ways than in our society. Children back then were your security. They were going to take care of you in your old age. There was no pension. There was no other government coming in. There was nothing. These were the ones you depended on. They're also the ones that you can pass everything on to. Your legacy, your heritage. The animals are gone too. The oxen and donkeys, they're used in farming. They're used, the oxen, they plow, the donkeys, they carry the crops from the field, etc. They're extremely important. It's how you make your living. That's gone. The sheep, another way that he makes his living. The sheep, they not only provide meat, they provide wool, they can be sold, and they're all gone. The camels, what are the camels used for other than spinning? Now, the camels are very important too, because they're the ones that provide the transport. They're the ones that carry the goods from one point to the other, or people from one point to another. Basically, the camels are like, if in a modern day business, that's your fleet. That's all your cars, that's your trucks, that's your planes, that's all of those things in your business. They can get goods from one point to another. That's all gone. And the servants, that's all your workers. That's all your employees. These are the people that keep things going, and they're gone. Everything that made Job in the world's eyes, it's gone. In one fell swoop. Now, Job still has the servants who deliver the messages, but without a livelihood, he can't keep them. He can't pay them. The greatest man in the East has hit rock bottom. So how would you react to such a loss? If you had everything stripped from you like that. A lot of people, hey, they face hard times, what do? There's no good God. How can there be a good God if He allows this to happen? Look at what happened to my family. Look at what happens to children. Look at the evil in the world. There cannot be a good God. That's reaction. Right? Times get tough, and so you turn on God. But the thing is that is not Job's reaction. Job is more like we saw earlier in Proverbs, that even in death, the righteous seek refuge in God. Even in death, the righteous seek refuge in God. While this verse implies it's the righteous person's own death, people die in our lives too. We see other people die. Our family members die. Our friends die. And we have to deal with the deaths of those we love. How do the righteous react to those kinds of events? Not only their own death, but the deaths of loved ones. The deaths of dreams. Job has lost all of his 10 children to death. They were his legacy, his hope for the future. Yet his reaction to this calamity speaks volumes. Look at Job 1, 20 through 22. All this happens. Blow after blow after blow. And at this, Job got up. He tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground and worshipped. And said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Could you do that? Job's first reaction is completely understandable, and it conforms perfectly to his culture. What did he say he did? He tore his robes. He shaved his head. These were, in this Near East culture, these were signs, outward signs to show people that you were grieving. Okay? So he is grieving, and he is making sure that people know it too. I mean, he's not going to go, oh yeah, they don't mean that much to me. No. He's hurting. He's in grief. But his next reaction tells us more about who Job is as a person. He worships. And he takes refuge in God. He turns to God in this. And his attitude, naked I came into the world. Naked I'm going to leave. God gave me all these great things, but then he took them away. Praise God. Notice what he doesn't do. Satan predicted he's going to rise up, he's going to curse you to your face. Job doesn't do that. Job doesn't do that. When we curse someone, we're cursing them because we think that what they've done is somehow bad. They've hurt us, they've done something bad. We think they've done wrong. And Job does what? He never accuses God of being wrong, of any wrongdoing. You gave, you took it away. Praise be to God. Would accusing God of wrongdoing here is sin, but why is it sin? Because if you're accusing a perfect being of sin, you have a totally screwed up version and a belief in who God is. God is the standard. If you had a dictionary in front of you and you looked up the word perfection, a spiritual dictionary, it would say God. Because God is perfect. God is all good, all loving. To accuse Him of sinning, that breaks the definition of who God is. In other words, if God could sin, He wouldn't be God. Job acknowledges that all he once had came from God, and as such, God has the right to take it all away. Do we see that? I mean, I have a lot of stuff. You have a lot of stuff. If God was to take it away right now, would you be willing and able to say, God's not doing anything wrong? He gave it to me. He took it away, and that's okay. You know, it's easy to say that in our heads. Oh, of course, Pastor John would do it. But in practice, but Job has the idea, the right idea, because he sees that after all, everything is temporary. Everything that we have is temporary. And we can praise God for what was had, what we experienced, what we had in our lives. The blessing. The problem is that blessings are great, but if we're not careful, we can be bound by them. We can take our possessions and they can become so important to us that we almost worship them. We almost can't imagine what life would be without them. Or the people in our lives. It's not that we shouldn't love them. Don't get me wrong. We should love the people in our lives. We should be grateful for the people in our lives. But we need to realize that they're on loan to us. Your parents are on loan to you. I mean, thank God for your parents, but they're on loan to you. They will be gone someday. My children are on loan to me. I love my children. But they'll move out. They'll get their families. They'll go on. They may die. And as hard as that is, devastating as that would be, I hope that I can keep in mind the same attitude that they were on loan to me. And I was blessed to have them in my life. But it's temporary. Everything we have is temporary. We need to let them go. Job passed Satan's first test. But another one is coming. And here's what we learn in Job 2, 1 through 8. On another day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord. Satan also came with them to present themselves before him. Oh boy, he's back. And the Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil, and he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason." "Skin for skin," Satan replied. "A man will give all he has for his own life. But now, stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones. He will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, it's in your hands, but you must spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. Ugh. Can you imagine having these? You know what a pimple is, right? I mean, Yeah, can you imagine having boils? Big open sores, just hurting all over your body. Soles of your feet, crown of your head. You're sitting in the ashes. And to get any relief from the pressure in there, you're taking a piece of broken pottery and scraping it to try to get some relief from the pressure that's building it. I don't know about you, but I think I'd feel sorry for myself, right? What a situation. The problem with pain, the problem with torture, the reason people do torture is because they know that when you get to a certain pain level, your resolve often drops. You won't tell me something? Okay, I'm going to torture you, and that pain is going to get so much that your resolve to keep your secret is going to drop, and you'll tell me everything I want to know. Satan is torturing Job, so that Job's resolve to follow God will drop. He will lose his integrity and curse God. Unfortunately, Satan is not the only one attacking Job at this point. You see that sometimes those closest to us will tempt us to sin. Sometimes those closest to us will tempt us to sin. It's almost like they're kicking us when we're down sometimes. Sin doesn't always trip us up on our own. Sometimes other people help. Even those that we call our friends or our family members. In the martial arts, has anybody ever taken any martial arts? Done any? Okay. As you advance, as you get further and further along, you get better belts, okay? When you take a belt test, it's not just you going against one opponent. As you get to be up into the brown belt level or the black belt level, they begin to put other people against you at the same time. You might be fighting 3 people, 4 people, 5 people. By the time you get into black belt territory, you might be fighting the entire dojo at the same time. Now, in these belt factories where it's just like, oh, you were 2 months, here's another belt, it can be pretty easy. You get into one of the intense programs, it's not so easy to be able to survive in this kind of situation and to actually be able to pass your black belt test. Because everything is attacking you all at once. Quite frankly, being a Christian, it's almost like living in a black belt test on a daily basis. And oftentimes, the closer you get to God, the more intensely the attack is. You're being attacked sometimes by all sides, and even those closest to you oftentimes are attacking you. As a righteous man, Job is proving he can maintain his integrity no matter what Satan unleashes. But can he do that when those he loves also attack? Look at Job 2, 9 through 10. Job 2, 9 through 10. It's coming. I know it is. Don't you just love technology? There we go. His wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." Oh, nice statement. He replied, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. Now, you got to think about this in many ways. Is his wife's grief understandable? Yeah. I mean, these are her children too, right? This is her livelihood as well. But Job's wife was not like Job. She was not on the same spiritual level. She was not following God in the same way that Job was. His reaction to her is interesting too. Her husband calls her a foolish woman. And in Hebrew, that word foolish does not just mean not very smart. That word foolish means morally deficient. Basically what he's saying is, you do not understand or are not able to follow or reason through what is really right and what is really wrong. You just don't get it. How can we expect good from God and not also accept trouble? It's hard when people around us suffer. It's hard when people around us in their suffering try to pull us to where they are. But Job still has to maintain his integrity through all of this. Now, Job's wife is like, curse God and die. Okay? Her reaction is harsh. But sometimes those attacks that we get from those we love and we care about, not like that. Sometimes they can be really well-meaning. People can attack us and still want what's best for us. We see that, and we're going to see that much, much later, in Job's friends. Job's friends, he's got 3 good friends who are going to come along, and they are going to attack him. Not beating him up or anything like that, or cursing him. They're well-meaning, but they're wrong. And we'll see that later on. We must not allow anyone, even those we love and who we are closest to steer us from God's path. There's another point I want us to bring out and to look at here. That even in the darkness, God shines a light on us. Even when it's the darkest. Even when we have lost seemingly everything, God still shines a light on us. You know, Voice of the Martyrs is back there on the table if you want a copy of that. You can subscribe to that, or Spirit of Martyrdom, or some of those others that you hear about, the things that happen to Christians, our persecuted brothers and sisters. Or you can read missionary biographies. You can read some of these stories. But you know, one of the things that when I read these, it always seems to come out, is that in story after story after story, even when life seems terribly hopeless, there's hope in the darkness. That God's shining a light. That even in the terrible times, God provides a way. God shows something, does something to encourage people. To be with, show that He's with those people in these terrible, terrible times. Even in Job's suffering, we see some light. Look at Job 2, 11 through 13. Enoch, 11 through 13.
Sorry.
When Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, say those 5 times faster, friends. Heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep out loud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him, because they saw how great his suffering was. You're going to see these friends later on. They're going to say some things that's going to make you mad, you know. And like I said earlier, you know, they're well-meaning. They're misguided, but they're well-meaning. But in this moment, I love this moment. In this moment, they come as three good friends. One of them, they just are there for him. They're just there. You know, sometimes just being with someone who's hurting, who's grieving, who's going through things, they don't need you in the hospital to come when their father or husband or wife is in surgery or their child is just barely hanging on in the NICU. They don't necessarily always need you to be there and come up with some kind of sage advice, some kind of wisdom that you're trying to share. Sometimes they just need you to be with them. When a person has lost a loved one and they're crying, they're heartbroken. Maybe they just need you to sit there and cry with them. Don't try to offer them any solutions. Well, buck up. You're going to get better. Life's going to be better tomorrow. They don't need that right now. They just need you. Just need you. And that's what Job's friends understand. Job's grief is too strong. They just need someone to sit. He just needs somebody to come alongside and to be there. And sometimes that's the best we can offer others. So even in death, even when we're faced with terrible situations, we need to seek refuge in God. And we need to understand that sometimes those closest to us, they're going to tempt us to sin. They're going to try, consciously or unconsciously, to pull us away. And even in the darkness, we need to know that God will shine a light for us. But if faced with calamity, will we stand or crumble? If you and I are faced with these kinds of things, maybe not to the extent of Job, will we stand firm or will we crumble? None of us know until we face it. But we can be more prepared by seeking to know and trust God more. You know, talk about Wednesday nights here, and people are always welcome to come if they're available. On Wednesday nights we get together and we pray. And we pray for lots of things, but one of the things that we've been praying for a lot lately is spiritual death. That we will be stronger as a church. That we won't be just skimming the surface of Christianity and faith. The true revival will come. That we will begin to experience God in a deeper and richer way. Because when you do experience God in a deeper and richer way, then you have the strength when hard times come. We take refuge in Him. We can learn a lot from Job's attitude. And the biggest question tonight is, or today is, when? Let's pray. Father, thank you for your love for us and your guidance, Lord. Thank you for the example of Job. A man who, when faced with terrible calamity, still maintains his integrity. And Lord, as we're going to see, he's not perfect. But Lord, in this instance, we can learn a lot. Because all of us are going to face tough times. So Lord, I just ask that you be with us during those tough times. Help us to see your light shining in the darkness. And help us to seek your face in all things. In Christ.
We are now entering into time